Hi, everyone. Welcome to Virtual NCTE, and my name is Emily Meixner. I am the coordinator of the English Education Program at the College of New Jersey, so I'm coming to you from Ewing, New Jersey, and I am here with two amazing authors and one amazing teacher, and we're going to be talking a little bit today about middle grade books with LGBTQ plus content. So I hope you'll stick around for the next 20 minutes and enjoy this conversation and learn about some books and learn about why kids are meaningful and how they're meaningfully reading them in middle grade classrooms. So with me today is Rachel Scupp, and she's an 8th grade teacher. Nicole Melleby is one of our authors, and Alyssa Zaczek is also one of our authors. So we're going to start with some book talks, just to let you know what the books are, what their titles are, what they're about, and how you can find them. And then we're going to move into a more general conversation about using these books in classrooms. So Nicole, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to talk about a couple of my books today. So this is In the Role of Bree Hutchins. That it came out this past June, so fairly recently. And In the Role of Bree Hutchins is basically a coming out story. So Bree is an 8th grader. She goes to a Catholic school, and she has an already complicated relationship with her mom that's made even more complicated in the face of her mom's faith and her her first crush on another girl. And what I wanted to do with Bree was kind of explore the idea of having this character, come out and then have things not necessarily go bad, but also not be great, and kind of how she navigates that with her mom throughout the book. I've also been kind of calling it a middle grade Ladybird meets Simon versus the Homo sapien agenda. So that's kind of a mash there that I always use. And then my next book is How to Become a Planet. That one will come out spring of next year, 2021. And it's a story about, the main character's name is Pluto. As you can tell, her and her mom love space. And Pluto at the start of the novel has just gotten a diagnosis of depression and anxiety. So she is, just on the cusp of finally getting that diagnosis and kind of where to go from here. She's been struggling with how to keep her old friends that she kind of lost along the way, and starting to make new friends and kind of trying to discover, does this make her any different? How does she kind of decide, how does she kind of connect who she was and who she is now, and be the Pluto that she always has been. And in Planet, Bree, the sexuality is in the forefront. It's a coming out story at the end of the day. With Planet, it's all kind of, just there. Pluto makes a new friend who is, she's in the very, very early stages of kind of recognizing that she is a she, her, but she's in those early stages of recognizing that she's non-binary. And throughout the story, the two of them get close and end up having, those sort of first crush kind of feelings. So that's going on while the heart of the story, which is Pluto and her mom and them struggling with her depression, is going on as well. So those are my two books.
That's great. Can we see the covers again, just so that we can see how beautiful they are and what they look like?
So, In the Role of Bree Hutchins and How to Become a Planet.
Awesome. Cool. Alyssa, tell us about your books.
Sure. So my book is Martin McLean, Middle School Queen. And Martin is about a 7th grade boy who is struggling to express himself. His mom is an artist, so she's really creative, and his best friends are kind of these loud mouths. They're very confident in themselves. And Martin isn't really sure where he fits in the grand scheme of things. So his mom, kind of sensing that there's a struggle going on with his identity, calls in his Tio Billy, and Tio Billy happens to be a drag queen. So he brings Martin to his first ever drag show, and Martin totally falls in love. And even though he has some stage fright and he's shy and he's not sure how his friends would react, he decides he wants to try to be a drag queen, and he is going to go out for all ages night. The conflict, though, on top of everything else, is that Martin is a mathlete, and his first drag show is the same night as the biggest competition of the year. So naturally, hilarity ensues. But on top of sort of those plot elements, Martin is also dealing with his first crush, he thinks, maybe on an 8th grade boy, and is kind of grappling with, what are these feelings? What does this mean? And, you know, what do other people's labels for me have to do with how I view myself? So a lot of self-discovery in Martin. I think, you know, Nicole, you described your book as a coming out story. I kind of wanted to write a story about the journey before the coming out and the phase where you don't really know who you are and what you're about. And at least for me, I remember being in middle school and feeling like everybody else around me had it all figured out. And I was the only person who was like an amorphous blob who couldn't figure it out. So a lot of Martin is about that kind of not knowing stage. So yeah, that's Martin McLean in a little nutshell.
So much fun. So Rachel, can you talk a little bit about, because you and I have been working with LGBTQ middle grade books for a couple of years now, but I wanted you to, you know, maybe tell a little bit about how these books and these narratives are now playing a role, an important role in the work that you do in your 8th grade classroom.
Absolutely. So just like Alyssa and Nicole were talking about in their books, there's these themes of children not knowing who they are and trying to figure out their place in the world, their identities, who they like, how they want to identify. And so this is perfect for middle school. Emily and I did put together this really wonderful LGBTQ unit, and the students love it. They think that it is really helpful for them to kind of come to terms with their own identities as they are growing up and coming into their own world. In addition, we do couch everything in the context of queer critical theory. And so we selected 5 different lenses that the students close read for through these beautiful YA texts. And so they learn about heteronormativity. They also learn about LGBTQ vocabulary, which is important for them to give names and words and identities to different experiences. They learn about internalized homophobia. They learn about the closet. And then they also learn about acceptance and advocacy. And so all of those ideas are expressed in these beautiful YA texts. So students are able to take these critical lenses and then process them through these beautifully crafted texts, but then also learn about themselves and about their peers. And so just as much as it is about, you know, can they identify these terms and can they process and analyze these books using, you know, critical queer theory, which is pretty intense for 8th graders to process, they're also learning how they can advocate for themselves and for others, and how they can be allies for those who are within the LGBTQ community. So these books are fantastic, and I'm so glad that both of you and many others that we use have written these books, because they are so important for my students.
It's interesting to think about middle grade specifically. So that's something that I was hoping that we could all talk about. Like, Nicole, when you started to write, and maybe Alyssa, you know, for you too, did you zoom in? Did you know right away that you wanted to have a middle grade audience, that that was where you wanted to write to? Or did that come sort of as you were thinking about the narrative and the character? Did you vacillate between older and younger? Or were you just, I definitely want to go middle school?
For me, I know I actually I went for my MFA in young adult literature specifically, and that's kind of where I thought I'd be. But then the more confidence I got in myself in telling stories about queer characters, I think my instinct kind of brought me younger and younger, because I think that's where, for me, a lot of questions could have been answered and a lot of stories would have benefited. So I started kind of reassessing the types of stories that I wanted to tell. And I think naturally, once I realized that this is what I wanted to do, the middle grade, it kind of fell into place for me.
Yeah, I think for me, it happened quite similarly. I think I knew right away with Martin that I wanted it to be middle grade, but that was a result of me really doing some soul searching about my experience with books growing up and when I needed certain stories the most. The sort of anecdote that I give when I'm talking to kids in middle school and high school is that I didn't know that you could be anything other than gay or straight until I was like older high school. I don't even think I heard the term bisexual, which is what I now identify as until I was probably going off to college. So for me, the idea of a middle grade book where you have protagonists who are questioning, as well as people who are already kind of in their out and proud stage of life, was really revolutionary. And that would have, I mean, I can't imagine how much different my story, my personal journey would have been if I had seen those characters reflected in my middle grade literature in a way that wasn't as the butt of a joke or as some kind of tragic, you know, tale, I guess. So for me, middle grade was a really natural fit because I felt so much and was going through so much in middle grade. I kind of wanted to reach back out to my younger self and the kids now in that way.
It's funny because, you know, sometimes when we first start talking about these books and about some of the vocabulary and these ideas in Rachel's class, some of the students will say things like, where have these books been all my life? You know, 12 years old or 13 years old, which is sort of a really like funny, dramatic thing to say. But it's like, these are the books that we've been waiting for. Where have they been? And so, right, like your description of yourself sort of thinking about what would have been useful to you at that age, and then what the kids express when they get into the books is just really, it's just really interesting to watch, and to watch them take the narratives very seriously, because they, I think at one point, Rachel, didn't one student say like, I want to read these books because I need to know this, because I need to know this about myself, but I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to hurt my friend.
Yes.
So, you know, thinking about identity at that age is about like safety and friendship, and then like identity, I think.
Mm-hmm. And also like advocating for each other, right? That was something that came out of it that was so powerful, where, you know, students would say those ideas of like, I don't want to hurt anybody. I want to make sure I'm an informed citizen, right? For my peers, but also myself. I want to understand, you know, who I am and also who my friends are. And so that was really beautiful. And then even just going off of how kids would comment on like, where have these books been my whole life? Also, like when you introduce this vocabulary to students, they run with it, and they're starting to point out heteronormativity in their world everywhere. And all of a sudden they're like tearing down, you know, Toys R Us's when they existed and being like, this is so heteronormative. Why is everything pink in the girls' aisle? And then, you know, writing letters to the editor for, you know, lists on BuzzFeed for TV shows that are for girls and for boys, and what does that mean? And so it's interesting to see how just kind of inviting this information into your classroom can just change the lives of these students who really need to see themselves represented and to learn about others.
It's so funny to me because when I was in middle school, we didn't have any of the vocabulary to talk about any of this. And then I go to school visits, and this is the way that the students now are able to express themselves in ways that I wouldn't even begin to comprehend. I did a school visit once with a GSA, and at the end, you know, I'm signing books, and these two girls come up to me and they're like, so what letter of the LGBTQ acronym are you? And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm on the spot here. But then they're so casually like, well, I'm bi, she's pan. And they're like explaining like all their whole lives to me. And I'm like, you know, they were sixth graders. And I'm like, you know yourselves, who you are, how to express yourselves, the words to express yourselves. And it was just, you know, I think a testament to the strides we've been making in media and obviously in the classrooms for them.
I have a very similar story actually, and it was with even younger kids. I was doing a school visit out on the West Coast, and I mean, we're talking grade school kids. It wasn't even middle grade yet. They were slightly younger. And when I do my book talks, I like to use LGBTQIA+, so that I'm totally inclusive. And I asked the group, do you guys know what those letters stand for? And they all went, uh-huh. And I said, okay, great. Can you say them with me? And this room full of like fourth graders, every single letter, 100%. And then I said, and plus is everybody else. And they were like, uh-huh. And I was like, this would have been radical, you know, when I was their age. And I'm so hopeful for the future, knowing that these kids are not only being provided the language and being educated on the language, but they're internalizing it and they're using it with one another, and it's very much being accepted. I think, you know, when I first sat down to write Martin and I was looking at all these videos of the drag kids, I thought these kids are the future because they are practicing radical self-acceptance. in a way that adults struggle to. So I'm so excited that kids are really kind of glomping on to this information and diving in with both feet.
Yeah, it's interesting because it really gives them more to think about in terms of how to tell, like what kinds of stories they can tell in general, but about themselves. And so, I mean, the more that they read stories that feature LGBTQIA plus people, kids, families, like the more the possibility of encountering a story like that, it's not impossible anymore. It's like, you know, it becomes much more familiar for them. And I can remember even back in my own experience, I don't think that I encountered a narrative that had LGBTQ people in it, maybe until I was in college or I was seeking it out for a class that I was going to teach as a teacher. And that was a long time ago, but it still surprises me even now that some of my college students have never encountered a book that has a queer character in it. So the idea, you know, of like making these available to kids in schools and talking with them about what the vocabulary means and giving them lenses for thinking about the kind of work, cultural work that these texts do, it just feels really like powerful and important and essential for the kids.
And it's also high interest, right? So like, I mean, all of that's really great about, you know, the vocabulary. And if you're thinking as a teacher, sometimes you're like, how can I fit this into my curriculum so that I'm hitting everything? But you also have these high interest books that are so fascinating. And then the conversations that students are having around these texts, if you invite in, you know, critical theory, it's extraordinary. It's richer than anything else I've ever had, you know, heard students being able to process. And so you can do both. You can have, you know, all of your standards met in a really interesting way that's also allowing students to learn how to become good citizens and to learn about each other. And so I just love these texts, and I think that it's powerful for these students to access them.
And just thinking about like high interest, I mean, Rachel can testify to this, but you know, the students, we assign them their books. And a lot of times, I mean, anybody who's been in schools knows that kids sometimes don't read the books that they've been assigned, that they pretend to, but they don't actually read them. And the kids read these. And they read these and they think about them deeply. And then they pass them back and forth between the groups. Like we had kids who read, I think of the 5 or 6 books that we were offering for the book clubs, they read every single book. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, to the point where they were like, you can borrow this, but I need it in 2 days for my meeting, my book club meeting. So can you like hurry up? Because then I need it, because I need to like then talk about quotes in it. And it's like, okay, and then I'll give you this book. It was amazing. These students are passing these books around and they're devouring them because they need them in their lives.
Yeah, yeah. We've got about 2 minutes left till we hit our 20-minute mark. So, I mean, to people out there, I would encourage you to check out both Nicole and Alyssa's books. They're really wonderful. The kids are very smart. They're very empowered. And these are really positive, age-appropriate, grade-appropriate narratives. There they are. Enjoy NCTE. Thank you for spending some time with us, and good luck and good work in your own classrooms.